Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today to hear some updated information on new legislation that's been introduced on school funding reform. I'm State Senator Pamela Althoff of the 32nd District. I'm also a former educator. With us today are also Senator Karen McConaughey of the 33rd District, Senator Dan McConkey of the 26th District, both who served on the Governor's School Funding Reform Task Force, as well as Senator Tom Rooney of the 27th District, who also is a high school teacher at West Linden, teaches history and economics. And we are here today because we really feel that it's critical that every student in Illinois has the resources they need to ensure that they receive a quality education, regardless of where they live. That's why we have been so committed to fixing the state's current broken school funding formula. To meet that challenge, we've introduced Senate Bill 1124, Floor Amendment 3, or on the House side, it is House Bill 4069. We believe these are great proposals, and they really are the best option for every student in Illinois to receive quality education. We think that this is a proposal that everyone in the state can get behind, and we welcome your questions and feedback. There is a small box at the bottom. If you have any questions or comments, we encourage you to provide those during this webinar. The best part of the current proposal is that no school district receives less money, and new money is distributed equitably to the poorest students in the state better than any other proposal out there, including Senate Bill 1. I'm going to turn it over right now to Senator Dan McConkey, who's going to start to explain about Senate Bill 1124, all of the individual components. Senator McConkey, can you do that for me, please?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Senator Althoff, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to go to and start looking at the slides here. And so here on the first slide, this is going to give you an outline of what the evidence-based model is, it looks like. And these are these portions that we have in here are identical between Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1124. So what the evidence-based model starts off with are 27 elements. These are research-based elements that have been identified by the education community as factors that we know when you incorporate them into a school funding formula. These are the expenses, the overhead that is required in order to ensure that a child is guaranteed to get an adequate education. Now, this number changes district by district, so every single district in the state will have their own what we call adequacy target. And this is based on the real cost, the associated things such as concentrations of poverty, number of English language learning students, and so forth that are in there. Next slide, thank you. So of this, as I mentioned, this model establishes an adequacy target for every single district. It calculates what's called a local capacity target. Now, the local capacity target is determined by your locally available equal assessed value of your property taxes. So every district will have a different EAV. This is really able to change based on where you are, based on those local values, so that those people who have very, very poor property values are able to get more resources from the state, and those that have very high wealth areas will be receiving less, so that everybody so that the funding that is distributed from the state level is distributed equitably. There is a base funding minimum that is established for every single district, and this is the hold harmless that Senator Althoff referred to, so that no district loses money. The term for that is the base funding minimum. And then the new money that Senator Althoff referred to that goes into the system will go into based on a tier-based system, so that those students and those districts that are farthest away from adequacy, they're the furthest underneath the adequacy target, will get money first. And then as more money goes into the system over time, as the state ups its investment from the current level of 26% of overall spending, ups that over time, as we've all made a commitment to do, those will help those poorest kids first. Now, Senate Bill, all right. Senate Bill 1124, Floor Amendment 3, this reflects the same language in many ways as Senate Bill 1, House Amendment 2. Using this evidence-based model that we outlined, It addresses poverty concentration in the same way. It establishes the tier structure. There are 4 tiers. Chicago Public Schools in both of these is in Tier 1. And it applies what's called a regionalization factor and other adjustments to ensure that the costs that are going across the state are fair. It also safeguards English language learners and special education funds. They're the same in the way they calculate our local resources and the way in which they establish the base funding minimum. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Senator McConaughey, who's going to talk about some of the differences between these bills.
Thank you, Senator McConaughey. So now we're going to talk about, we have Senate Bill 1, which pretty sure you've all heard about that, and Senate Bill 1124, which is our Republican compromise. So there are 4 key pieces to this that we had one perspective on and the Senate Democrats had a different perspective on. We have come back and offered a compromise as a way to demonstrate a willingness to work out the differences between the Democrat proposal and the Republican. So let me go through some of these very quickly. First one is mandate relief. So in Senate Bill 1, the bill that has been promoted extensively, has no mandate relief, and that is something that you have all talked to us about extensively as we've all worked on the Education Funding Reform Commission. That continued to come up as an area where we could provide some relief at the local school board level to drive down some of the costs. So no mandate relief in Senate Bill 1, and in ours, Senate Bill 1124, we offered the same mandate relief that CPS has. Chicago Public Schools have a set of mandate relief mechanisms that no other school district in the state of Illinois has. Our compromise was to identify the mandates that we had previously agreed to in the Education Funding Commission. So what is that? That's phys ed, driver's ed, third-party contracting, and a provision that allows mandate relief by vote of the local school board. What's not in the compromise, and was the piece that the Democrat proposal was adamantly opposed to, was the management rights piece. That is, again, a right that CPS has that no other school district in the state has. That was the compromise that we offered. Next slide, and we can always come back and talk about any of these pieces. The next is the pension system. As many of you are also aware, the state picks up the basic pension cost for all school districts. However, at CPS, they pay for their pension costs. So in the bill, and this has been something we've been debating a long time, the fairness of picking up the pension costs in CPS is something that we probably needed to do, but there's been some discussion about how we go about that. So in Senate Bill 1, what was offered was for the state to pick up the normal costs, the legacy costs, and the health care. Our original bill offered no pickup. So the compromise position on this has been to pick up the normal cost, that it does not include picking up legacy costs or health care. Again, the goal being, let's be consistent with CPS with every other school district in the state and offer the same system. Next is the Chicago Block Grant. If you are not familiar with the Chicago Block Grant, you submit an invoice, so to speak, to get reimbursed for your categoricals. In Chicago, in the past, CPS gets just a chunk of the money up front before any submittal of an invoice. They wanted, the Democrat proposal wanted to bake the value of the Chicago Block Grant, 250, am I right, 250? $250 million. And bake that into the hold harmless, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and then be able to submit bills going forward for categoricals. What that does is they take that same money and counts it twice. We felt that that was inappropriate, and we offered no credit for the lost block grant. The compromise that we offered was to give Chicago some of the individual items inside the block grant. So that's where our compromise is on that. The next one is hold harmless. So the Chicago Block Grant plays prominently, and the pension costs play prominently into this question of hold harmless. Hold harmless is, as as it always is the amount that we are guaranteeing that every school district will get every year. It's kind of the new starting point. All new money going into the system will go through the evidence-based model that Dan just talked about. So there's some difference of opinion about how we handle hold harmless, what gets considered inside that. The Senate Bill 1 version held harmless at the district level, and our proposal held it at the per pupil. The reason for that is to accommodate, take into consideration the changes in population. As population in various parts of the state change, CPS, quite frankly, at one time was represented 33% of the students in the system. Today, they're down to about 19%. The idea being that the funding should track with the student, not with the district. So we offered a compromise that to hold harmless by district for the first 3 years, and then moving into year 4 with a rolling average of those 3 years, and year 4 start counting hold harmless by pupil. So that is the essence of the 4 pieces of the compromise proposal. And now,
Can I, we do have some questions, and I think that they're pertinent to the information that was just presented, if it's okay.
Well, can we get, because his is part of that.
Okay.
His is, and then we'll jump. Yeah.
Well, then I'll just jump into my piece, which is one of the things that's been a sticking point that also people who've been paying attention to the newspapers have been asking, even at a town hall meeting that I had recently in Rolling Meadows. People really aren't sure who to believe when it comes to is Chicago getting a special deal or not. On our side, sometimes we use the word bailout. That makes the other side jump up and down. They say, no, 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 our bill is going to treat everything equally. So we think that if you want to go to the source itself, meaning the ISBE breakdown, the spreadsheet that anybody can find on the web, if you go to look at where Chicago's base funding minimum is, you can go right into the spreadsheet, because statisticians, people who crunch the numbers, have to tell the truth all the time. And so if you go to the particular cell that shows the base amount that Chicago is going to get, there's actually a notation in the spreadsheet that says, hey, this number is different. It isn't us who did it, meaning the number crunchers. It specifically says that at direction, they've put in not only the fiscal year 17 pension costs for the city of Chicago. Again, even if we do the normal cost pickup going forward with fiscal year 18 and beyond, this is this fiscal year 17 amount of money that's been thrown into the base minimum. It also goes back to fiscal year 16, to some of the parts of the block grant that Chicago says that they're still owed. And so even going beyond the parts of the block grant that we've talked about, where we will grant them going forward, it goes back 2 years and says, let's take that money that we feel we're owed, and okay, maybe we should look at that, but then to put it in a formula that will carry on forward, we say there's no way you can look at that as not being a special deal. We say that if it's going back to cover pension costs and block grants, sorry, straight from the numbers, that's a special deal for the city of Chicago that nobody else gets. And so there's another interesting cell in the spreadsheet as well. It shows what everybody gets additionally per student. So some districts like mine are getting about $31 more per student, right in that range. It shows Chicago getting maybe $270-some per student. But that cell hasn't been changed like the base minimum one has. It doesn't have those extra amounts in when you divide it out per pupil. So if you were to put those amounts in, the actual amount of money that the CPS will be getting, and divide that by number of students, that number goes up over $1,300. Again, districts like mine getting $31 more per student, this whole deal put together, $1,300 per student for CPS. We stand back and go, if that's what's in Senate Bill 1, how do you not call that a special deal?
So that's a perfect segue. So excellent, thank you. I've got 3 questions. The first is, we've heard, and I think we've covered it, but let's drill down maybe a little bit. We've heard people say Senate Bill 1124 represents a redistribution of dollars from poor school districts to wealthy school districts, a change from Senate Bill 1. How is Senate Bill 1124's formula distribution different from SB 1? And I think each one of you kind of touched on that, but maybe we can drill down and be very specific on how our formula and the compromise is substantially different.
So, and I might defer to Secretary Purvis, who's also here with us from the Governor's office, to fill in on this. But if you go in, what essentially happens is the hold harmless creates the opportunity, the funding has to go in and fund the hold harmless first. So the more that you put into that, the more that's put in for Chicago into that, ends up making less money available to go through the formula. So that's why we didn't put all of those funds into the hold harmless, because we wanted as much money as possible to flow through the formula. If you actually look at the difference between what Chicago gets on a per student basis through the formula versus what they get through 1124 versus Senate Bill 1, they actually get more money through the formula than through Senate Bill 1. And the reason why is because they do qualify for those funds. More funds are running through the formula.
If I could just say one thing that's really important, is that the distribution mechanism is exactly the same. And I think that's a really important part. Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 1124, also House Bill 4069, the House version of this. The 27 elements are the same, and the distribution method is the same. The difference in the runs that you're seeing, again, is what happens to those dollars, as Senator Rooney talked about, that had been in the stopgap loss for the year before. And again, if we believe that the distribution method in both of these bills, in Senate Bill 1 and 1124, is more equitable than what we were doing in the base fund minimum, what we were doing in our current school funding formula, if we believe it's even better than what we did in the equity grants, then I think what Senators Barrickman and Representative Pritchard did in saying, let's take that money and put it through this new formula that we believe is more equitable, is actually getting districts to equity faster.
So, Secretary Purvis, while I have you here, one of the other questions is it true that the Senate Republicans' evidence-based formula, or Senate Bill 1124, results in the loss of federal funding for special education and free and reduced lunch programs in school districts?
So thank you for that question. Those of you who know, I started my career as a special educator, so no. So there was one question, actually, we talked about on Saturday at the Committee of the Whole in the House. Number one, there is an issue, and I believe this is an issue in both bills, because as Senator Barrickman said, he actually took Senate Bill 1 and made this compromise changes to that bill, rather than even starting with his own bill. There's a $2 million problem that has to do with children who receive free and reduced lunch. Actually, both at the House and the Senate working with ISB right now to solve that problem. The second question was about maintenance of effort of special education funds. In speaking to Robert Wolf, who's the Chief Financial Officer at the Illinois State Board of Education, he was very clear that there is language in both Senate Bill 1 and in 1124-469 that will ensure that we lose no federal funds. And as I said earlier, and as all of you know, special education is really a federal unfunded mandate. So we need to make sure that we get every dollar from the feds, and I don't think anyone would ever allow a school funding formula to go into effect that would minimize the amount of money we get from the federal government.
Can I just go back to the poverty question, because this was very disturbing in the hearing in the House, where it was continually suggested that we're taking money away from poor kids. And I think it's just important to remind everybody that the whole purpose of changing the funding formula was to be more effective as a state in addressing the needs of kids in poverty. So when someone suggests that, they are either misleading or they don't understand what the formula is designed to do. So every dollar, as Dan described, every dollar that gets put through the formula goes in, is fed through a tier system. So the wealthier districts are the ones that are given extra money last. The first priority is to put money into those districts where you're addressing poverty. So I just think it's always important to remind people that's what this formula is designed to do.
Yeah, and if I can comment also on that, the interesting thing about that is if you look at the runs, if you look at the difference, the numbers by district between Senate Bill 1 and 1124, every district benefits under 1124. And it's not because we put more money into it, it's because more money is running through the formula. And so some of our poorest districts, East St. Louis, Streeter, some of these places that actually have greater concentrations of poverty than Chicago Public Schools actually do tremendously better. There was a district I was yesterday in Peoria at a press conference there. Peoria Public Schools, very poor there. Under Senate Bill 1, they would get $1.8 million additional dollars per year. Under 1124, they would get $5.2 million. And these are schools that Peoria desperately needs, and that story is really repeated in districts across the state when you look at the numbers.
And so that leads again to the last question that I have currently in front of me, which is talk about what we were referencing when we said some of the block grant dollars. How does that whole block grant program, the kind of shifting of monies, what they currently get, to putting it into the formula, how does that actually work? Secretary Purvis, do you want to take that, please?
Certainly. So in this new formula, there was a lot of conversation during the commission about the mandated categoricals and which mandated categoricals should be included in the integrated formula and which would stay out. The decision was made, the recommendation was made at the commission to move special education personnel and to move the education of English learners into the integrated formula. I want to make a note that in both Senate Bill 1 and in 1124, and more importantly, I think when people talk about the hopefully eventual appropriations bills, that we want to make the funding of the education of English learners whole. So both bills talk about adding $38 million to the overall formula to make sure there is no more proration of English learners. But both of those funds will be run through the formula. Why is that important? Because that means that those dollars are means tested, and then again, our districts who are furthest away from adequacy, Tier 1 and Tier 2, will get the bulk of those dollars. But part of the compromise that you all have brought forward says there's $50 million or around there in the CPS block grant that is associated with those two categories. In order to make sure that the Chicago Public Schools, which is a deserving district with kids who need the support of the state, has that $50 million is placed in the base funding minimum. So the idea was, okay, again, this idea of compromise, I think your earlier bills did not have any of that block grant in, and that moves that $50 million into the base and leaves the $202 million outside to run through the integrated formula.
So we're talking about money. Question. The hold harmless using the FY17 dollars uses the term distributed. Will funds vouchered but not yet received by school districts be included in distributed?
So I think, first of all, I want to say for especially defend the folks at ISB, they have done all the work they're supposed to have these vouchers completed and over to the comptroller's office. But they have not been prioritized, and that's why you all who are running school districts, I think, are owed overall about $1.3 billion with this. And we know that that has created a real cash flow problem for every one of you. The idea is that those dollars, we hope, and the plan is, as money comes into the state and the comptroller prioritizes those FY17 mandated categoricals should be paid as is written into the FY17 laws. In FY18, again, the majority of the mandated categoricals will be treated exactly as they are, but those two mandated categoricals will be placed into the integrated formula.
Karen, I think this one's for you. Can you please repeat how Senate Bill 1124 eliminates the most controversial elements of management flexibility?
Yeah, well, this is one of my favorite topics.
It was for you.
The governor has coined it CPS for all, and I have been a big cheerleader on the commission and throughout on this issue. Essentially what it is that CPS is given more flexibility as management in negotiations on their labor contracts as it relates to length of school day, curriculum. Beth, you probably know the categories of it.
It really just has to do with the flexibility that that administrators have to make those personnel decisions in a timely manner that allows them to manage their districts effectively.
Right.
And the Chicago Public Schools has the ability to do that.
And there's like about 10 criteria.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what they are, but needless to say, Secretary is absolutely right. It allows more flexibility. We believe, and when we talk to school districts around the state, this has been one of the areas that we have concluded is important. Sorry, you know, you keep switching back and forth. I'm getting dizzy. that we think, again, trying to help at the school district level, give you as much flexibility to make local decisions to provide the best quality education. This is an area that we have felt strongly about, but quite frankly, the Democrats have been very firm that this is not an area that they want to offer to the rest of the school districts in the state. So we're attempting to try to, again, find compromise in order to get something done here. We have gotten them to agree, well, we're talking about a compromise that includes mandate relief on physical education, driver's ed, third-party contracting, and the ability to reduce mandates at the local school board level by a school board vote. So those are things that we have all put back on the table in our negotiations as a way to try to give you some level of mandate relief.
If I could jump in, though, that is still very important to the governor, this, ability for every superintendent to have this. So, it is something that in future years we hope is still a conversation to bring that flexibility to district superintendents, school boards, and principals.
And we thank all of you who are listening to us and watching us on the webinar for submitting the questions. We encourage you to continue to do that. Question from Community Consolidated School District 15. What factors go into determining a district's tier level?
Well, essentially, District 15 is mine.
I know.
The tiers are broken out with this adequacy target and the capacity. So essentially the bands say if you're below 60%, you're tier 1. If you're anywhere between 60 to 90%, tier 2. Isn't that right?
I think it's.
All of a sudden the math doesn't seem right there.
I will say that one of the problems with the tiers depends on how much money that is put in. So one of the reasons this is confusing is I think you're talking about if the Senate Bill 1124 hopes for about $288 million to be put in, and that is very much aligned with Senator Staines' Senate Bill 6. And what is there for education. So what that level is, I believe it's up to 60%, and then I think it's 60 to 80%. And then
no, it is. It's 60 to 90.
Okay.
Then it's 90 to 100 is
tier
3, and then over 100 is tier 4. So, for example, the way that breaks out for school districts in my area, if you are funding at, say, 87%, which one of my districts is according to the calculation, that's a tier 2 basis. And so you're in that portion that gets a little bit more money than tier 3 does, which I also have a school district. It's District 23 that's in tier 3. So they see their per pupil dollar amount be about $4 less than somebody like District 15. And they want to know why. Well, because the District 15 percentage is calculated at around 87, 88%, while the District 23 is 97%. And so with the bands being 60% and down, 60 to 90, 90 to 100, and then over 100 being tier 4, that's where my high school districts are, is in tier 4, saying that they get the least amount of new money. So
Beth,
I hope that answers the question.
Do you mind just commenting a little bit on where each dollar goes in, how it goes into the tiers, because I don't think people probably have really any understanding of that.
Sure, and I'd like to just also comment to remind everyone, although we are in the midst of a battle of what is the right bill, to understand that both of these bills do things that have never been done in the state before and move us light years ahead. First of all, every district will have an adequacy target that will be recalculated every year based on the needs of its students. So for the first time ever, and I think this is going to be something else people are going to have to get used to looking at, it costs less to educate children in Wilmette than it does in Peoria. And so you will see adequacy targets for Peoria much higher than they are in Wilmette. And since our spending, or the spending of the Peoria School District is much higher than, in Wilmette is much higher than Peoria, this is going to be very different for people. So you have to look at both your adequacy target and your local available resources. And so in the tier system, again, let's say we have $100. That's the easiest way. If we had $100 to distribute, the first $50 would go to tier 1. The next $49 would be split among tier 1 and tier 2. The last dollar is split along tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4. And the idea is that we want to, as quickly as possible, move tier 1 schools to tier 2. And in a perfect world, in a decade, we would have all Tier 3 and Tier 4 schools. And that is the ultimate idea behind this. And also remembering that your local available resources, like our current, are driven by, eventually, by the time we get to year 4, but what are the number of students that you have, what is your EAV, and what percentage of kids that you have in poverty. So those are important levers.
And so how much you would get on a per year basis will fluctuate up or down. If suddenly your property wealth you build a big shopping mall and suddenly it comes on, you're going to get less money from the state because suddenly you have new tax revenue that's coming in. So all those things are going to be recalculated on an annual basis by ISB.
That is correct.
And if I could give just a bit of a breakout as to what that could mean for folks. We don't have any Tier 1 schools in my district, but you can see the breakdown between 2, 3, and 4 just in the numbers that are calculated. Like I mentioned, our ones that are in Tier 2 are around $31 extra per student. Our ones that are in Tier 3, our one that's in Tier 3 is about $27 extra per student. And the Tier 4s, it's around $2 per student. So you can see the drop-off once you get up into that Tier 4. It's still more money than you had before, but it's not nearly the amounts that are for the lower tiers.
So let's, I have no questions right now, so let's go on and finish the PowerPoint. Senator McConaughey, it is yours. Can you kind of look at a few examples of what the gain is per student in your specific district?
Yeah, and I think we're each going to do that, pick 2 districts to just kind of put out there for you so you really can understand what the difference is and what it means to our districts, the difference between Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1124. So the first one on the screen is Community Unit School District 300 in my district. One of the larger school districts goes from $80 essentially to $186 additional money per student under Senate Bill 1124. School District 46, which is second largest school district in the state, goes from $383 per student under 1124. That goes to $685. So again, those are just for my district, and I think Pam is yours. You have.
Mine should be the next slide. And these are 3 of the districts that have a high concentration of poverty levels. And in Marengo Union Elementary District 165, in Senate Bill 1, they would have received $74.36 per student. Yet in Senate Bill 1124, it's $174.25, which is almost $100 more. In Harrison School District, which is Wonder Lake, it would be $103.24 under Senate Bill 1, and in Senate Bill 1124, it's $240.81. You can also see Harvard School District on the slide as well. But what I'd like to point out is my high school district in Crystal Lake, which by far is one of the wealthier school districts within District 32, still receives an overall gain of almost double the amount per student in Senate Bill 1124 than it would in Senate Bill 1. And I think that is unbelievably remarkable and equitable. So, Senator McConaughey, I think you're next.
Yeah, so here are the three of the poorer school districts in my area, Diamond Lake, Mundelein, and Wakanda. You can see what the numbers there are there on the screen. You know, one of the things is that you'll see throughout these numbers as we've been going through them is a nearly doubling. This story goes over and over again, nearly doubling the amount of money available. And in fact, maybe if you don't mind, Secretary Purvis, just answering a question, we've been accused of not having apples-to-apples numbers. Maybe we can, if you just don't mind explaining a little bit briefly for those people who have been told that our numbers are not truthful or valid, despite the fact that they come from ISB, you know, what's the story here and why can they trust these numbers?
Well, I think first of all you can trust these numbers because this analysis was done by the Illinois State Board of Education. They also did the analysis for Senate Bill 1. I think that the other thing to remember is that in Senate Bill 1 there is an assumption of an additional $565 million in funding. And the way that $565 million comes is an additional $215 for the Chicago Public Schools normal cost pension and retiree health care costs, and there is an additional $350 million that is placed through the school, through the integrated formula. One of my concerns with that modeling, and I think ISB did a great job of showing how the bill works, but that it assumes a gain in funding in FY18 that I just don't believe we have the money for as a state.
Right.
Would love to do it, but I don't think we do. And especially, I don't even think the Senate Democrats believe that. Again, Senator Staines' SB 6 had an increase in education of about $288 million, $250 to go through the new formula, and $38 million for free and for English learners. So one of the questions I have is, if we were to run that 288 through, that would account for the 215, and then there'd be about $73 million to distribute through the integrated formula. So my question is, how much money would be diverted to the Chicago Public Schools of that $70 million, and how would people feel about this bill if they remember these are school funding bills? These are not appropriation bills. And we could pass this tomorrow, and I would love for 1124 to be passed before the week is over, and we still, that doesn't mean we have the budget to pay for this. I think what was done in 1124 is that what Senator Barackman did is said, okay, we are going to assume the $200 million, again, CPS gets $50 million in the block grant. CPS will get its normal cost pensions in a separate bill. Right. So it will not be part of the school funding bill, but it will be a separate bill that Republicans support. And then what will happen is we will take the $200 million and run that through the school, the other $200 million in the block grant, run that through the school funding formula, and then run an additional, it's about $88 million through as well, so that we want to make sure we see that $288 million come through.
And CPS will get some of that money because they
Right.
will be treated the same as every other school district when the money goes through the formula.
Well, and that's why if you look at the runs that Senator Barackman has done by ISB that are on their website, you will see that when you take that and you add the money for the normal cost pensions from outside, CPS sees about an increase of about 109. I apologize. I don't know if it's 113 or 119 million
I think it's
dollars.
119.
I do too.
So I think it's important to say that people who are saying CPS loses are not accounting for the money that is outside of the formula for their normal cost pensions, because the governor believes very much that we should not be addressing pensions in a school funding formula.
Yeah, so with that in mind, if you don't mind going one more slide and allow Senator Rooney to show his district.
Which
Here?
is quite fine. I already stole this thunder by running through before.
There's the numbers up on the screen so you can see,
there
but
they
at least
are.
now people understand better, you know, what, and I think that your point here has been really important. What we want is a school funding formula that works all the time, regardless if you put a dollar in or $100 million in or $1 billion in. You know, this is something that treats all students across the state, especially the poorest, equitably. And this is something that we have had, this is why we've had an issue with Senate Bill 1 and why we've offered the compromise that we've had.
And real quickly, last question. How does this legislation affect the funding of charter schools?
Charter schools are treated identically in both Senate Bill 1 and 1124. They would be treated equitably. They would receive between 97 and 103% of the PCTC. But one thing, just to go back to the Senator's last comment, is what you're talking about in treating all districts equitably is why the governor has been very clear that he will either veto Senate Bill 1 or he will use his powers to amendatory veto the bill so that it looks very similar to 1124, which we think looks very similar to Senate Bill 1 Amendment 3.
That's an important point that everybody needs to keep in mind, because if Senate Bill, if I hear correctly, Senate Bill 1 goes through the way that it's been passed through both chambers and goes to the governor's desk, he's not going to sign that into law.
He will not sign that into law. He will either outright veto it or use his powers to amendatory veto to, again, make sure that it treats all 852 districts equitably.
Closing comments.
Please, well, I'll start. Please call us. Love to talk to you individually, answer any questions. Go to ISB's website, and if you want to really look at every single district wins, but go see for yourself. Go look at it on ISB's website. Most of us have lots of this information on our individual websites. Don't be afraid to ask any questions. All the questions today were really good, and we're here to answer questions. I guess for me, I just ask that you keep an open mind about these two pieces of legislation and understand that to get to a compromise, the top priority has to be fairness to every child in this state. That's how we guarantee a high-quality education.
I would also ask for you to comment to your different lobby groups that are here, whether it be School Board Alliance and Superintendents Association. I can't keep all the alphabet soup right, but make sure you make your voices known. I know certainly you've been getting some information from them. They need to hear from you as to what not just what you think, but also your questions as well. And obviously, feel free to contact us.
My closing thought would be everything that you've heard about the two sides being so close, so close, so close. The idea that everything that we've talked about here, the way the money's distributed, the formula that's used, et cetera, it is all really the same. The big difference that keeps us apart are these special deals that no other district gets. And what I think we have to remember, we meaning those of us who are not CPS, every dollar in those deals that has to be given to Chicago first can't be run through the distribution formula to get it out to the other 851 districts across the state. So if we're really talking about fairness, 1124 is a better alternative.
And I would just like to say thank you very much for hanging in as long as you did to hear the answers to all the questions, to hear the presentation. Please share this information with your colleagues. This webinar will be shown on all of our websites. You can direct them to that. You can have individuals call us or have conversations within your own organizations and let people know we remain available to answer any of those questions, or when we come home, hopefully soon, we can provide additional information in person. So thank you very much for your time.